Hello, Salim Omar here from the Straight Talk about Small Business Success podcast. I've got a special guest with us. His name is Warren Coughlin. He's an amazing entrepreneur, mentor. Warren, welcome.
Thank you very much, Salim. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, really looking forward to this. Warren's been coaching entrepreneurs to success, freedom, and aligning their businesses with their values since 2002. That's a lot of years. Clients have enjoyed eight-figure exits, high-performance cultures, rapid growth, enhanced focus, less time at work, and greater impacts. He's also a recovering lawyer, a serial entrepreneur, a college professor, and an actor, theater director. Wow, quite an interesting bio or profile or story. But Warren, tell us your backstory. What brings you to doing what you're doing now?
So it's interesting with all those experiences. It's weird to have a bio that starts at birth, but in my case, it's what got me there. I was supposed to die at birth. I was given zero chance of survival. I was the second person in history to live through this weird congenital defect. And when I found out about it, I thought I got to do something with this gift I wasn't supposed to receive. And so I was exploring different things to do, and I thought, okay, be a lawyer and maybe go into politics. And that once I got into that, I didn't really like it that much. Maybe, college professor, transform young minds, the transformative power of art through acting and theater directing. And then it was in entrepreneurship that it really started to sing to me that entrepreneurship, I believe, is one of the most powerful forces for positive social change. And to that extent, then it's really important that people do it well, because if they do it well, they're going to be able to have bigger impacts. And so I got into it through entrepreneurship. And then when I exited a business, I thought, okay, I want to help other entrepreneurs. And so that's what got me into coaching back in 2002, when it wasn't even a thing. I just heard about it from a family friend and went, what is that? And then fell in love with it. And I've been doing it ever since. And it's a very, very rewarding career. And it helps entrepreneurs and helps their families and helps the people who work for them.
Yeah, that's amazing. Good stuff. What is a business that matters, and why is it important?
Yeah, that's a term I developed a few years ago. And because entrepreneurship is a positive force for social good, I believe a business that matters is one that gives to the entrepreneur the lifestyle they want, good income, they're taking risks, they're putting in effort, so they deserve to have value in their lives, but that also contributes value. It matters because it has some positive impact. And that can be defined at a large level, like I'm sucking carbon out of the atmosphere, or it can be, at a local level. Like I have a client who his whole thing is, I just want to give my employees a really great place to work and feel fulfillment, but it has some positive impact beyond just profitability.
Yeah, love that. Love that. And what's the biggest and most common error that you see entrepreneurs make?
Whoa, that's a hard question to answer because they're so varied. I'd say like that question could go on for an hour because there's sort of a meta level and then there's like practical levels. At a meta level, I think it's that people don't look at business as a discipline. Like if you go to play a sport, you learn the skills of the sport, right? If you want to be a doctor, you have to learn anatomy. In engineering, you've got to learn math and physics. In business, there are disciplines, there are practices that there's skills that are inherent to the business. And unfortunately, I think the biggest mistake people make is this idea that, well, I had a great idea and therefore my idea is going to just take it and I'm going to be able to run it without actually cultivating those skills and disciplines that are inherent in running a business. So that's kind of the meta level. And when you learn the skills, it's like playing the piano or any other skill. You don't just get to play music without practicing.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd actually heard of this concept, Warren, a number of years back, like in 1999, from Michael Gerber, The E-Myth Revisited. The E-Myth, the entrepreneurial myth. He wrote the book, The E-Myth Revisited. That's the name that came in my mind. But the entrepreneurial myth is because you know how to do a technical thing, you assume that you can run a business that does that technical thing, and they're two very different things.
Oh yeah, very, very different sets of skills for sure.
Yeah. So we know how to do the technical stuff, the technical thing, whatever that may be, whatever industry or niche we're in, but we don't know how to run the business. And I think that's what you're talking about is that's a skill set that needs to be developed. Is
Yes. And there's different pieces to it. There's like, do you have good product market fit? Do you know how to identify your customer base? Do you know how to identify what their needs are, how to market to them, how to sell to them, how to build a team, how to build a culture, how to motivate and performance manage people, how to know your numbers? The numbers, from your business, obviously, as a CPA, that tons of entrepreneurs don't know their numbers well enough. And that's sort of, how do you know if you're winning the game if you don't know how to keep score? And all those skills are critical to becoming a successful entrepreneur. Now, it doesn't mean you have to know that before you start a business, but as you're growing your business, you have to be intentional about developing the knowledge and skills to get you to the next level.
Strategy often seems complicated. What do you mean by the term?
That's a good question. Strategy is one of those words that it can apply to like a really big level, like brand positioning strategy, all the way down to just what's your marketing strategy. So when I talk about it with my clients, I think of it in terms of operational strategy, like what are we going to do in this year to achieve certain objectives? So my definition of strategy is simply this. It's the answer to this question. How do we deploy our scarce resources of time, team, and money to achieve a particular objective or objectives? That's it. That's all strategy is. And that's an important definition because it's how do we deploy resources? That's what you're doing. Like you have scarce time, you have scarce money, and you have scarce team members. So you cannot achieve a strategy if you are not deploying resources to the execution of that. And so that's the question to answer is like, first, what is the objective we want to reach? What resources do I have available to me? And then how am I going to deploy them over time to get there? And that's all I mean by strategy. So it doesn't require you to be an MBA. It just requires you to think back and look what I have in front of me and say, how am I going to use it to get there?
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And for small businesses, I would think it's even more critical, right? Because everything is limited. We have limited resources.
Yeah, and
in every aspect of of the word.
And the hard part about it, like it's a simple concept, but what makes it hard is too many entrepreneurs kind of play whack-a-mole, right? It's like, oh, this issue came up, I better hit it. This issue came up, I better hit it. The idea of strategy is we're going to focus. Yes, there are 23 things that need to be fixed in my business, but I can't fix all 23 right now. So I'm going to pick 2. The other 21 are going to fester, but I'm going to fix these 2. Then I'm going to fix the next 2. Then I'm going to fix the next 2. And when you do that, you actually get more done than less done. When you try to do 23 at once, basically nothing gets completed. You're busy, you're exhausted, you're trying really hard, but you don't fundamentally change things. But when you say, geez, you know what? My product doesn't have good product market fit. I've got to revise that a little bit. Everything else will be easier once you answer that question. Or our sales processes suck. Like we've got a really low conversion rate. Everything else has to wait until we fix that piece. And when you get really, really crystal on what those things are, everybody in the organization goes, oh, that's where we're going. That's what we're doing. It gets your culture aligned, it gets your team aligned, and you wind up just achieving more. There's an old saying I use that we tend to overestimate what we can do in the short run and underestimate what we can do in the long run. Yeah, and if you can, contain your energy, like focus it in the short term, you're going to get way more done.
Yeah, that's good advice. Now, what are some of the important keys to effective strategy, and where does it usually go off the rails?
Where does it? So the keys are really choosing a focus, right? That's the first piece, choosing a focus. A lot of people mix up strategy with goal setting, saying clarity on a goal and stopping there. Like this is where we want to go, but a goal is not a plan, right? A plan involves how you get there. So you have to get to the level of saying we have specific tactics that we are going to use to get there. And this is when those tactics get applied. And this is who is applying them. So it's like getting really specific about what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, and who's accountable to do it. Where it breaks down the most is in that definition of accountability. Usually it's sort of like, we're going to do this, but people aren't really clear who the accountability is. Sometimes it's the level up. People haven't really bought into what the focus is. It's like blah, blah. Yeah, we're going to do that and then forget about it. And then the last level is really an execution. That what tends to happen to most entrepreneurs is they say this is what they're going to do, and then something comes up. A client's upset about something, a team member quits, there's a change in the economy, whatever. And so then they get bumped off course. And then within a month, this document that they spent a whole long time putting together as a strategy gets sort of put on a shelf, and they just stay in reactive mode. And then they wind up going, see, this strategy stuff doesn't work. But it does work if you execute it. So you actually need that's one of when I talked about the disciplines, there is a discipline to execution. How you make sure your strategy is being implemented, even while there are things coming up that you couldn't foresee. There's one of the things that is 100% predictable is there are going to be things you can't predict, right? Like that's always the case. And so you have to know that. So if you build a plan that is going to occupy 100% of your time, it's a bad plan because you're not leaving the resources to respond to the inevitable stuff that you're not going to be able to anticipate, right?
Yeah,
totally. I think it's called Thatcher's law, plan for the unplannable. And so if you don't have a methodology of execution that accommodates the unknown, then your execution is going to fail.
Yeah, love that. Now, doesn't culture eat strategy?
I used to believe that there's an old that saying, right? Culture eats strategy.
Yeah.
I actually have revised that for lots of reasons. But to my mind, culture and strategy are a perfect marriage. They're bedfellows. They're colleagues that work together. Strategy defines what needs to get done. Culture ensures that it gets done. If you have culture without strategy, you have a bunch of really motivated people who solve problems, but they don't have clear direction. If you have strategy without a good culture, you've got a great idea and plan, but it winds up not getting executed. But when you have the two of them together, you're cooking with gas. So culture for this conversation is, I use the term high performance culture, which is very different from a nice culture. A high performance culture is one that is driven to achieve particular outcomes and, has A players who are highly motivated to achieve those outcomes. And when you have that, then it becomes really interesting.
Yeah. Now, is there a tension between culture and systems, and how do you reconcile that?
Yeah, so there is. And, you mentioned the E-Myth, which I agree is a fantastic book, but I quibble with it in a few respects. The idea of the E-Myth is that every business can just have this franchise set of systems. That it doesn't pay enough attention to the human element and to the unknowns, in my view. So it's a great framework, but it's not perfectly applicable. So systems there's two problems with systems if you over systemize. First is A players, like really great creative thinkers who want to solve problems. Did they love having everything they do constrained by a process? No, they don't. Right? And so they're going to leave. If you over systemize an organization, you're going to drive your A players out. The second thing is when there's a bump to the system, like an economic shock, a technological change, a new competitor or something, you don't have the agility to respond to it, right? So I like to use the analogy of a soccer field, or a football field, depending on where your listeners are. That it's very clear what the boundaries are around the field. People have an understanding of kind of where their lane is and where their position is, but there's an overlap between those, and then they can be creative and have autonomy what to do within their lane, right? And then there's rules to the game, but there's a lot of creativity within it. So you want to have systems, but not so much that people can't have some autonomy in decision making and how they solve problems to create that opportunity for them to be able to really grow. And then there's just times where, when I talk about culture too, a big part of culture is the values. What are the values that drive the business? So I'll use a non-business example to explain why this is so important. I had a friend of mine went in for surgery. She was having a hysterectomy, actually. And She came out, and after the surgery, a couple hours after, the doctor came in and said, "How you feeling?" And she says, "Oh, fine, I guess." And he says, "Okay, I'm going to sign your release papers." And then another hour later, all the anesthetic wore off, and she had paralysis down one side of her body and was experiencing incredible pain. The nurse said, "Well, the doctor signed your release papers, so you've got to leave." She was back in the emergency ward 2 hours later. Now, from a system standpoint, everybody involved in that followed the system, right? Doctor came in, doctor filled release form, nurse read release form, nurse released patient, followed the system perfectly. The system did not accommodate the exception, right? From a common sense standpoint, this is a person who was experiencing really negative outcomes from the surgery. She should not have been released, right? And when you get that sort of, systems can drive into kind of a bureaucratic mentality, which is, well, the checklist says this, I'm supposed to do this now. Culture, you know, when you have a high performance culture, that's when you have people who are like, I'm focused on the outcomes. I recognize the system is a tool to take to the outcomes, but if we're doing something that is not going to take me to the outcome, I'm raising a flag. Right. And so that's where there's there shouldn't be a tension between systems and culture. There just has to be a recognition of where they each apply.
Really like how you articulated that. That's amazing. Good stuff, man. Really valuable advice, and really liked your perspective on systems. Very, it's different. It's unique. I haven't heard that for quite a while. So good stuff.
Well, I had it happen twice with clients this very week, where there was a system in place and it didn't quite apply, and they didn't know what to do. And when we put it, the values would determine what decision you make in those circumstances.
Now, what happens, and I've seen this happen quite a bit, when people don't buy into the culture?
So what happens? So first you got to say, why is that? Right.
Yeah. So what do you have if people don't buy into, into culture?
So sometimes people have defined a culture that isn't true, so if it's like every organization has its own culture, and it's got to be one that works for this organization. Right. So there has to be, one of the ways to get buy-in is to have people, part of your team, help define what those values and behaviors are. Usually if the team helps create it, then they'll own it. Right. Sometimes you get buy-in just because as a business grows, like when you raise your standards, doesn't matter what it is, right? Sports, arts, whatever it is. If you raise your standards, some people are going to play and some people aren't. And the hard choice is, you've got to make sure that the people are right for the culture you've created. And sometimes that means hard decisions, right? And it's like in anything. So I've used sports, but let's say it's a arts example. So like when I was doing theater, if someone came in, if I was doing a play that had a really professional standard, like I did some that were just, they're amateur stuff. And so your expectations are lower. But when you raise the game and somebody comes in and is late for rehearsal and doesn't know their lines and stuff, they're out, right? Like, we're not going to sacrifice the standards of the organization because you're too lazy to do your work. Right? Or because you don't like it. So the hard decision for a lot of entrepreneurs is when to let people go. And so when you say you don't have buy-in, it's really looking at why. If there's a disconnect, like the values aren't true, then maybe you have to rethink that, right? Or if you've created some people, I've heard of this kind of, you have a culture of like freedom and autonomy, but you're an engineering firm and you need really, in that case, you need tighter systems. Then you've got this culture that's misaligned with how the work is done.
Yeah.
Right. And so you've got to think about that. But if you've done that work properly, if you've done the work to define the values, behaviors, systems, and let me actually just give you a definition. Can I just give you a definition of culture?
Of course. Yeah.
So culture is the systems, the incentives, and the signals that reveal the values of the organization. So culture is not just kumbaya, aren't we nice? Do we have a foosball tables and have drinks on Friday afternoons? Right. It's, if you say we are an organization that is focused on safety, but then your incentive plan motivates people to only hit productivity targets, you are not going to produce the cultural outcome of safety, right? Because your incentives are inconsistent with that. If the systems that you have are all about hitting productivity targets, and those are the only documents that foremen have to submit every week, you're telling people that productivity is in fact more important than safety, no matter what you say is important.
Mm.
And
It's
so
a misalignment, isn't it?
yeah. So you have to so culture is not just saying, aren't we a great group of people? It's saying we want to produce certain behaviors that are aligned with these values. So we've got to build our systems and our compensation plans. And when I say signals, it's like, if you say, we really want people who are, team players, but then the person who's a sycophant who, sucks up to you all the time gets to go on the golf games with you, you're signaling that that isn't true.
Correct.
And so you as a leader have to be consistent in all of those things. And so that's why, culture is hard. Like, it takes a lot of work.
It's hard. Yes.
Yeah. But it's rewarding.
Yeah. This has been incredible. We've got a few minutes left before we finish off, Warren. What are one or two questions I didn't ask you that I should have asked you?
I don't know if they should. One of the questions is around values. Like, what do we mean by values and that kind of, so, values in an organization. For me, when I talk about business that matters, values are really important, right? Because they not only determine behaviors, but they also predetermine the outcome of ethical decisions, right? Like, if you're going to truly be committed to certain values, that means you have to say no to certain things. Like, one of the tests of your, values are easy when the circumstances are easy. They are hard when you have to lose to stay committed to your values. Like, if it's going to cost you money to stay true to your values, are you going to do that?
Yeah.
And if you don't, what does that communicate to your team? And what does that do to the culture long term? I remember Tony Hsieh, who was the CEO of Zappos.com.
Yeah.
He said that he would interview people, and he said, I knew they could make me a lot of money, but I knew they wouldn't align with our values, and that would long term undermine our brand, and so I wouldn't hire them.
Yeah.
And that's super important, right? And so one of the questions is, how committed are you to the values? And that's a hard conversation to have. And then the other piece is using this stuff. Like I said, when I see people introduce values for the first time, they also go into this, what I call the kumbaya stuff, right? Oh, isn't it nice? We're all this. But when you start having, and this is the challenge to the entrepreneurs who are listening, have the hard conversations. Like, when something goes wrong in the company, with a client or a project or something, you take out your values and you say, where were we off value? And then you're having some interesting conversations, because then somebody says, well, they didn't follow the value of hard work, say, or excellence, and suddenly they start pointing the fingers. And then you start going, yeah, but we have this value of teamwork. So you saw that they weren't committing excellence, and you didn't say anything. So where was the value of teamwork in there? And then all of a sudden, there are people that are like, whoa. And it's not, so we're not going to blame each other. This isn't about finger pointing. This is, we all own our culture. And so when any of us sees us not living the culture, we all are responsible for it being preserved. You start having those conversations, that's when things start to change and become great, right? Like, that's when people go, oh, this is hard, but it was also really rewarding. And the last,
is that the way to get culture at a high performing culture, using your words? Improving culture is having conversations.
Oh yeah, all the time. All the time. Almost everything is viewed through a values lens. And here's the last thing I'll say. When I was teaching at the college, one of the things, I had this course called career development, but I turned it almost into a personal development course. And I talked a lot about values and about ethics and about personal responsibility and all this kind of stuff. And here's the thing I found out. These, people make all these negative comments about young people. They were hungry for these kinds of conversations. I had a tough guy in the class. He said, yours is the only class I never skip. I had a woman crying at the end of the course. I had a guy say it saved his relationship. Like, there's just not a lot of environments now where people have meaty conversations about right and wrong and about personal responsibility and growth. And when you can introduce those kind of conversations into your workplace, people will, like, they'll be uncomfortable at the beginning, but I've seen it. I have a client, man, the team didn't want to talk about this stuff. As soon as we sort of pulled the lid off the pot, it was amazing. And so you actually, that's part of my business that matters. You actually help people become better people.
Better, human beings. Yeah. This is awesome. This was really, really beneficial, Warren. Everything that you shared, the gems you sprinkled all through this interview, I really appreciate it. If listeners want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
If you just go to my website, warrencoughlin.com, and on there, there's actually, to your question about mistakes, there's actually a free guide in there called the 3 Killer Mistakes That Sentence Entrepreneurs to Sleep Stealing Stress and Grindingly Long Hours. It's a handy, quick little read, but it'll probably help you really focus a lot of your efforts. And in there, it talks a little bit about some of the experiences I've had in a program that I've got called the Business That Matters Foundation System, which is just 3 months to get, it actually gets all this stuff in place. Your one thing we didn't talk about, but does your financials, your culture, and a strategic planning program all within 3 months, which is kind of unheard of, but I've done this for 20 years now. So I've actually defined the system to make it happen. So all that information's on my site.
Got it. Awesome. Great. Yeah, I highly encourage listeners to check Warren out. His website, the URL is going to be in the show notes and so forth. Warren, thank you so much. Really appreciate the time you gave us and the advice that you shared with us.
Oh, my pleasure. It was a real pleasure.
Awesome. Take care. Thanks.